My in-laws kicked me out on Thanksgiving. We don't want a poor girl at our table. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way the air seemed to leave the room, how every eye at that long mahogany table turned toward me like searchlights finding their target. The crystal chandeliers above suddenly felt too bright, exposing every thread of my borrowed dress, every scuff on my Target flats, every insecurity I'd tried so hard to bury that morning. It was supposed to be perfect. That's what I kept telling myself in the weeks leading up to that Thanksgiving. Marcus had finally invited me to meet his family, and despite my nerves, despite the anxious knots in my stomach that wouldn't untangle, I believed this was the next step. We'd been together for 2 years. 2 years of late-night conversations, of him showing up at the diner where I waitressed just to sit in my section and leave ridiculous tips, of him holding me when I cried about my student loans and telling me I was the strongest woman he'd ever met. "They're going to love you," he'd promised, kissing my forehead the night before. "Just be yourself." But myself apparently wasn't good enough for the Hendersons of Westport, Connecticut. I'd prepared for weeks. I researched proper dining etiquette, watched YouTube videos on how to navigate formal dinner settings. I practiced conversation topics in my bathroom mirror. I spent my last $200, money I'd been saving for textbooks, on getting my hair done, my nails done, looking the part. My grandmother insisted I bring her sweet potato pie, the one with the secret ingredient she'd never shared with anyone but me. "Baby girl," she'd said, pressing the dish into my hands, "you bring a piece of home with you. Remind yourself who you are." When Marcus picked me up that Thursday morning, I thought I looked good. My roommate had let me borrow her nicest dress, a simple navy blue number that was probably from H&M but looked elegant enough. I'd spent an hour on my makeup, making sure everything was natural but polished. My natural hair was twisted into an updo that had taken me 3 hours the night before. Marcus told me I looked beautiful. I almost believed him. Then we pulled up to the house. It wasn't a house. Houses have lawns and maybe a nice front door. This was an estate. The kind of place you see in movies about old money and family dynasties. Stone facade. Actual columns framing the entrance. A circular driveway with a fountain, a real fountain with water and cherubs and everything. There were luxury cars parked everywhere. Mercedes, BMW, a Tesla, something else I couldn't even identify. My mouth went dry. "Marcus, you said your family was comfortable." He had the decency to look sheepish. "Comfortable is relative. This isn't comfortable. This is—" I couldn't even find the words. This was wealth. Generational, unapologetic, intimidating wealth. "Hey." He grabbed my hand. "It's just money. It doesn't change anything. They're still just people, and you're still the woman I love. Okay?" I nodded, but I was already retreating inside myself, already feeling small. His mother answered the door. Catherine Henderson. She was exactly what I'd pictured from Marcus's brief descriptions, except somehow more polished, more elegant, more terrifying. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her jewelry was understated, but clearly expensive. Her blonde hair was styled in that effortless way that only comes from regular salon visits. And her smile, God, that smile, was perfectly practiced and completely empty. Her eyes swept over me in less than 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, I watched her face do something subtle but devastating. A tiny tightening around her mouth, a microscopic lift of one eyebrow, a barely perceptible step backward. She'd already decided. Before I'd said a word, before I'd even fully crossed the threshold, Catherine Henderson had looked at me, a 33-year-old black woman in a borrowed dress carrying a homemade pie, and made her judgment. "Marcus," she said, her voice honey-sweet and cold as winter. "You're late. Everyone's been waiting." Then, as an afterthought, her eyes flicked to me. "And this must be your friend." Not girlfriend. Not partner. Friend. "Mom, this is Janelle. My girlfriend. The woman I told you about." Marcus's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Defensive. Almost pleading. "Of course. How lovely." Catherine's smile never wavered as she stepped aside to let us in. "Everyone's in the dining room. We're just about to start." The inside of the house was even more overwhelming than the outside. Everything was cream and gold and pristine. Abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than my car. Fresh flowers, enormous arrangements of them, on every surface. The kind of place where you're afraid to touch anything, afraid to breathe wrong. Marcus tried to lead me toward the dining room, but his mother's hand on his arm stopped him. Marcus, darling, could I speak with you for just a moment? Kitchen. It wasn't a question. He looked at me apologetically. Just wait here. 2 seconds. And then I was alone in that cavernous hallway, holding my grandmother's pie like a shield, listening to the murmur of voices and laughter coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I could hear snatches of their conversation, his mother's sharp whisper, Marcus's lower defensive rumble, but couldn't make out words. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. Standing there, I had time to notice everything. The way my shoes looked scuffed against their marble floors, how my reflection in the hall mirror showed every difference between me and this world, how even the air smelled expensive, like money and fresh flowers, and the kind of comfort I'd never known. When Marcus returned, his jaw was tight. Come on, let's get this over with. Not let's go enjoy dinner. Let's get this over with. That should have been my first clue to leave. But I'd invested so much, emotionally, financially, mentally, into this moment. I'd built it up so much in my head. And some part of me still believed that if they just got to know me, if they just saw how much Marcus and I loved each other, it would be okay. The dining room was stunning and terrifying. A table that could easily seat 20 people, set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum. More flowers. More crystal. Windows overlooking grounds that seemed to stretch forever. And people, at least 15 of them, all turned to look at us as we entered. Marcus's father, tall, silver-haired, assessing. His sister Victoria, blonde like their mother, wearing what I would later learn was Chanel, looking at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive upholstery. His brother Christopher, young, smug, already drunk from the look of him. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them cut from the same cloth, all of them registering my presence with varying degrees of surprise, curiosity, and poorly concealed distaste. Everyone, Marcus announced, his hand tight on my lower back. This is Janelle, my girlfriend. The silence lasted just a beat too long. Then the performance began. Polite smiles. Limp handshakes. How nice to meet you. Marcus has told us so little about you. What an interesting dress. I was seated at the far end of the table, as far from Marcus as physically possible. He was placed next to his mother at the head. I was squeezed between an elderly aunt who immediately turned her back to me and a cousin who introduced himself then proceeded to ignore my existence entirely. Catherine orchestrated it all with the precision of a general positioning troops. And that's when I realized this wasn't just dinner. This was a setup. A stage. A public humiliation carefully planned and perfectly executed. And I was the main event. The first course was served, some kind of soup with a French name I couldn't pronounce, and I felt myself fragmenting. Part of me was trying to remember which spoon to use. Part of me was hyper-aware of every movement I made, convinced I was doing something wrong. And part of me, the part that had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my grandmother and 2 cousins, the part that had worked since I was 14, the part that had fought for everything I had, was screaming at me to leave. But I stayed. Because I loved Marcus. Because I wanted to prove I belonged. Because some desperate, aching part of me needed these people to see that I was worthy. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They talked about their summer in the Hamptons. Someone's daughter, who'd just gotten into Yale. The deplorable state of their stock portfolio, though apparently it was still performing adequately. They name-dropped restaurants I'd never heard of, designers I couldn't afford, places I'd never go. I tried to contribute once. Someone mentioned traveling, and I said, I've always wanted to visit Ghana. That's where my great-grandmother was from, and I've been saving. How quaint. Victoria cut me off. Not even looking at me. Christopher, tell everyone about Monaco. The yacht club there was absolutely divine. I felt my face burn. Felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller in my chair. The cousin next to me, Brandon, I think, finally acknowledged my existence during the second course. So, Janelle, what do you do? The table didn't go quiet, but I felt several people tuning in, waiting. I'm finishing my business degree, I said, trying to sound confident. I'm in my last semester at Central State. And I work full-time. I'm a shift supervisor at a call center, and I waitress on weekends at Sullivan's Diner downtown. I said it proudly, because it was something to be proud of. I was working 2 jobs, putting myself through school, carrying a 3.7 GPA. I was doing it alone, without family money or safety nets or trust funds. But Brandon's face did something complicated. Pity mixed with embarrassment, like I just told him something uncomfortably intimate.
Oh.
That's, well, good for you. Very industrious. Industrious. Like I was a servant who'd learned to read. And what are your plans after graduation? Catherine's voice cut through from the head of the table. Everyone was listening now. Assuming you graduate, of course. I know those state schools can be quite challenging. The way she said state schools made it sound like I was attending classes in a dumpster. I'm planning to work in marketing or business consulting, I said, meeting her eyes. I've actually already had 2 job offers. I'm just deciding which direction I want to take my career. It was true. I'd been recruited by a small startup and a mid-size firm. Neither was prestigious, but they were real offers with real salaries that would be more money than I'd ever made in my life. How ambitious, Catherine said, and somehow made ambition sound like a character flaw. Marcus, darling, you didn't mention your friend was so career-focused. She's my girlfriend, Mom. And yes, Janelle's incredible. She's built everything herself from nothing. She's self-made. His father interrupted, setting down his wine glass. Yes, we understand. Very admirable, I'm sure. His tone suggested it was anything but. The main course arrived. Turkey, prepared in some complicated way with herbs and glazes. Side dishes I didn't recognize. Everything was beautiful and cold and tasteless in my mouth. I caught Marcus's eye down the table. He looked miserable, but he wasn't saying anything, wasn't defending me, wasn't standing up to them. He just looked down at his plate, jaw clenched, fork pushing food around. And something in my chest began to crack. This was the man who'd told me he loved me, who'd said he wanted to build a life with me, who'd promised that his family's money didn't matter, that we were equals, that love was enough. But when it came down to it, when his family's disapproval was staring him in the face, he was silent. Victoria started talking about her charity work, some foundation for underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was waxing poetic about giving back and helping those less fortunate, while looking at me like I was something that needed to be wiped off her shoe. We focus on providing opportunities, she said, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. Because some people simply don't have the advantages we were born with. It's not their fault, really. It's just circumstance. It must be so fulfilling, I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt, to help people you feel so superior to. The table went silent. Victoria's smile froze. Excuse me? I just mean, I continued, something reckless taking over. It's easy to be charitable when you're looking down from above, isn't it? When you can write a check and feel good about yourself without ever actually seeing the people you're helping as equals. Well, Catherine's voice was ice. Someone has opinions. Marcus shot me a look. A warning. Behave. Don't make waves. Don't embarrass me. And that look, that one pleading, fearful look, broke something in me completely. I excused myself. Said I needed the restroom. Marcus gave me directions to the powder room, and I walked through that massive house on shaking legs, trying not to cry, trying to hold myself together. The bathroom was bigger than my bedroom. Marble everything. Gold fixtures. A chandelier over the toilet. A chandelier. In the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror. My makeup was still perfect. My hair was still in place. But my eyes looked defeated. Lost. Who was I trying to be? What was I trying to prove? I thought about my grandmother, who'd raised me on Social Security checks and love, who taught me to hold my head high, to never let anyone make me feel small, to know my worth regardless of what anyone else thought. What would she say if she could see me now? Sitting at that table, accepting their condescension, swallowing their insults, letting them treat me like I was less than human? I splashed cold water on my wrists, careful not to ruin my makeup. Took deep breaths. Gave myself a pep talk. You can do this. Just get through dinner. For Marcus. Because you love him. But even as I thought it, a small voice inside asked, "Does he love you enough?" When I returned to the dining room, dessert was being served. Not my grandmother's sweet potato pie. That was still sitting on the entry hall table where I'd left it, untouched and unwanted. Instead, there was some elaborate French pastry thing that probably required 3 days and a culinary degree to make. I sat down, picked up my fork, prepared to endure the rest of this nightmare. That's when Catherine cleared her throat. The sound cut through every other conversation. The room fell silent. Everyone turned toward her. My stomach dropped. I knew. Somehow, I knew what was coming. "I think," Catherine began, her voice perfectly measured and devastatingly calm, "we need to address the elephant in the room." "Don't say it," I thought.
Please don't say it.
"Marcus." She looked at her son. "We've been patient. We've tried to be understanding. But this situation," she gestured vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me, "has gone on quite long enough." "Mom," Marcus's voice cracked. "Let me finish." Her tone left no room for argument. "Our family has certain standards, expectations, a legacy to uphold. Surely you understand that who we associate with, who we bring into our family, reflects on all of us." My hands gripped the edge of the table. I couldn't breathe. "This isn't about being unkind," she continued, and somehow that made it worse. The pretense of civility while delivering a killing blow. "This is simply about being realistic. You come from different worlds, different backgrounds, different everything." I saw what she didn't say, what she wouldn't say out loud but hung in the air anyway. Different races, different classes, different values. "She doesn't fit, Marcus. Surely even you can see that." My vision was blurring. From anger or tears or both, I couldn't tell. "Look at her," Victoria added, emboldened by her mother's attack. "She doesn't know which fork to use. She probably thinks Armani is an Italian restaurant. She's what?" I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, distant.
Say it. I'm poor.
I'm black. I'm not good enough for your precious family. That's what you mean, isn't it? The mask dropped. Just for a second, I saw Catherine's real face. Not politely concerned. Not graciously disapproving. Ugly. Hateful. Superior. "Well," she said, standing up slowly, deliberately. "Since you've put it so directly.
Yes.
You're not suitable. You'll never be suitable. This relationship is inappropriate, and it ends today." She looked at me with such contempt, such absolute certainty of her own righteousness. "We don't want a poor girl at our table. This is a family celebration, and you," her pause was perfectly timed for maximum cruelty, "are not family. You will never be family." Every eye in the room was on me. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked satisfied. Christopher was smirking. Victoria looked vindicated. And Marcus. Marcus was staring at his plate, his hands clenched into fists, his face red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. But he said nothing. In that moment, I understood everything. I understood that love, without courage, is just words. That promises without action are empty. That I could never, would never, build a life with someone who couldn't stand up for me when it mattered most. The humiliation I felt wasn't about being poor. It wasn't even about being rejected by these horrible people. It was about realizing that the man I loved valued their approval more than my dignity. And that was the worst betrayal of all. The silence after Catherine's words stretched like taffy, thick and suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, the tick of an antique clock somewhere, the slight clink of someone's wine glass being set down too carefully. Every face at that table wore a different expression. Some looked away, embarrassed by the cruelty, but unwilling to oppose it. Some watched with barely concealed satisfaction, enjoying the spectacle. Catherine stood at the head of the table like a queen who just pronounced sentence, her face composed, almost serene. And Marcus, God, Marcus, still hadn't said a word, hadn't stood up, hadn't defended me, hadn't done anything except sit there with his fists clenched and his head down like a child being scolded. Something happened to me in that moment. Something fundamental shifted inside my chest. The girl who'd walked into this house, nervous, eager to please, desperate to be accepted, died right there at that table. And someone else stood up in her place. Someone stronger. Someone who remembered who the hell she was. I pushed my chair back slowly. The scrape of wood on marble echoed through the silent room. I stood, smoothed down my borrowed dress, and looked around the table at each of them.
Really looked at them.
You're right, I said, my voice steady and clear. We do come from different worlds. Catherine's eyebrow arched, surprised I was speaking, probably expecting tears or begging or some kind of dramatic scene she could feel superior about later. I come from a world where character matters more than a bank account, where family means showing up for each other, not just showing off to each other, where you judge people by what they build, not what they inherit. I picked up my purse, then walked around the table to where I'd left my grandmother's pie on the sideboard. I picked it up carefully, cradling it like the precious thing it was. I come from a world where a grandmother who raised 4 kids on a cleaning woman's salary could still make a pie so good that people in our neighborhood would knock on our door just hoping for a slice. Where she taught me that real wealth is in who loves you, not what you own. Victoria rolled her eyes, but I saw the aunt next to me, the one who'd ignored me all night, glance away, something like shame crossing her face. I come from a world where working 2 jobs while going to school isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. Where pulling yourself up without a trust fund or family connections means you're strong, not inferior. I looked directly at Catherine now. And most importantly, I come from a world where a woman knows her own worth, where she doesn't need permission from people like you to know she's valuable, where she sure as hell doesn't stay where she's not wanted. I turned to Marcus then. He finally looked up at me, and I saw it all in his face, the guilt, the shame, the conflict. But not enough courage, not enough love, not enough of whatever it would have taken for him to choose me over this. I come from a world, I said softly, just to him, where a man who loves a woman stands up for her, where he doesn't let anyone, not even his family, disrespect her, where love means something more than pretty words when it's convenient. His mouth opened. Janelle, please.
No.
The word came out firm. Final.
You had your chance to speak.
You had a dozen chances tonight. You sat there silent while they picked me apart, while your mother told me I wasn't good enough,
while your sister mocked everything about me.
You sat there, and you said nothing. They're my family, he whispered, and it sounded like an apology and an excuse all at once. And I was supposed to be your future, I said. I guess now we both know what you chose. I walked toward the door, my head high, my grandmother's pie secure in my hands. Behind me, I heard movement. Catherine's voice sharp. Well, how dramatic. Marcus, let her go. You'll thank me for this someday. I didn't look back. Didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing if their words could still hurt me. I walked through that massive hallway, past the expensive art and fresh flowers and marble floors, out the front door with its ridiculous columns, down the stone steps to the circular driveway. The November air was cold and sharp and real. I stood there for a moment, shaking but free, and pulled out my phone to call an Uber. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Marcus, of course. Coming after me now that we were away from his family's eyes. Janelle, wait.
Please.
Just wait. He was out of breath, his face flushed. I know that was bad. I know I should have said something. But you have to understand, they're my family. I can't just cut them off. We can work through this. Give it time, they'll come around. Time? I turned to face him, and I saw him flinch at whatever he saw in my eyes. You want me to give it time? To wait around hoping that maybe someday your family will decide I'm acceptable? That maybe if I'm patient enough, grateful enough, small enough, they'll let me sit at their table? That's not what I mean. That's exactly what you mean. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here.
Not now.
Not for him. You want me to accept being treated like I'm less than human because it's easier than standing up to them. You want me to make myself smaller so you don't have to be uncomfortable. I love you, he said, and he sounded desperate. I do. I love you. Love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. It's a choice. It's action. It's standing up and saying, this is the woman I love, and if you can't respect her, you can't have me in your life either. That's love. What you did in there, that was cowardice. You're being unfair. No. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. What's unfair is you making me believe we had a future when you had to know, that you'd never choose me over them. What's unfair is you letting me walk into that house thinking I was meeting your family, when really I was being set up for a public execution. What's unfair is you sitting there silent while your mother told me I'd never be good enough. The Uber pulled up. A silver Toyota that looked like heaven to me in that moment.
Don't call me, I said. Don't text.
Don't show up at my apartment or my work.
We're done.
Not because of them, because of you. Because I deserve someone who's brave enough to love me out loud. I got in the car and didn't look back as we pulled away. Didn't watch him standing there in that circular driveway. Didn't see which direction he walked, back into that house or somewhere else. The driver tried to make conversation, but I couldn't talk. I just stared out the window at the big houses turning into smaller houses turning into apartment buildings, watching wealth fade into something more familiar, more real. The ride cost $87. It might as well have been $1 million for what it took out of me. But I paid it, tipped the driver, and walked up to my third-floor apartment with my grandmother's pie still perfect in my hands. I sat on my second-hand couch in my tiny studio with the radiator that clanked and the neighbor's TV bleeding through the thin walls, and I ate that entire pie. Every last bite. And I cried. God, how I cried. Not because I missed Marcus or regretted leaving, but because it hurt. Because loving someone and learning they're not who you thought they were, that's a special kind of grief. My phone buzzed constantly. 37 calls from Marcus that night. Voicemails I didn't listen to. Texts that started apologetic and ended angry, like I was the one who'd done something wrong by refusing to accept disrespect. I turned off my phone, ran a bath in my cramped bathroom, washed off the makeup, took down my hair, scrubbed away every trace of the girl who'd tried so hard to be acceptable to people who'd never accept her. And when I looked at myself in my cheap bathroom mirror, no chandelier, no marble, just me and honest lighting, I made myself a promise. I would never again let anyone make me feel like I wasn't enough. I would build my own table, my own life, my own success. And I would do it my way, on my terms, without apology. The next morning, I blocked Marcus's number. Changed mine completely. Went scorched earth on every social media platform we shared. If he tried to find me at work or school, security would escort him out. I was done. Completely, totally done. My roommate asked what happened. I told her the short version. She hugged me and said, "Their loss. You're gonna show them." And I did. I threw myself into my last semester with a fury I didn't know I possessed. Graduated with honors. Took the startup job, the riskier one, the one that paid less but offered equity and growth potential. Worked 16-hour days. Learned everything I could. Made myself indispensable. Within a year, I was promoted. Within 2, I was leading a team. Within 3, I had enough saved to start my own consulting firm, helping small businesses with digital marketing and brand strategy. I specialized in working with minority-owned businesses, companies run by people who'd been underestimated their whole lives, who'd built something from nothing. People like me. My business grew slowly at first, then faster. I hired carefully people who were hungry, talented, overlooked by bigger firms. We worked out of a cramped office above a deli, but we delivered results. Our clients started recommending us. Word spread. I dated, cautiously. Had a few relationships that didn't work out. That was okay. I was learning what I needed, what I wouldn't compromise on. I was learning to be alone without being lonely. Then I met James. He was a high school teacher, made $52,000 a year, drove a 2008 Toyota Camry with a dent in the passenger door, had student loans that would take him another decade to pay off, lived in a one-bedroom apartment not much bigger than mine. On our third date, over Thai food at a hole-in-the-wall place, I told him my story. All of it. The Thanksgiving dinner. The humiliation.
The pie.
He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you still make that pie? Your grandmother's recipe?" I laughed, surprised.
Yeah. Why?
"Because someday when you're ready, I'd like to try it. Not because I need to judge whether it's good enough for some fancy table. Just because it's yours. Because it matters to you. That makes it matter to me." I started crying right there in that restaurant. Happy tears this time. James didn't have money, but he had character. When I got promoted, he was the first to celebrate. When I talked about starting my business, he helped me build my website even though he barely knew how. When I worked late, he'd show up with food, sit quietly grading papers while I finished proposals. He met my grandmother and asked her about her life, really listened. He came to Sunday dinners at her house and complimented her cooking and helped wash dishes without being asked.